I heard my daughter-in-law say she'd drug my wine before I even reached the dining room doorway. The words floated through the half-open door like smoke, casual and certain. Jessica's voice, bright, efficient. The way she spoke about meal planning or carpet samples. I'd just grind it up fine. She'll never taste it in the Merlot. She always drinks 2 glasses at Sunday dinner. My hand found the door frame. The wood was cool beneath my palm, solid and real, while the air around me seemed to thin. 74 years on this earth, and I thought I'd stopped being surprised by human cruelty. I was wrong. How much? That was Brandon. My son. The boy I'd raised alone after Robert died, working double shifts at the hospital so he could go to that fancy college. So he could meet girls like Jessica, who knew which fork to use and how to arrange flowers, enough to make her drowsy, confused. The doctor said it happens naturally at her age, memory issues, decision-making problems. When she signs the power of attorney tomorrow, no one will question it. The hallway narrowed around me, elegance. Perhaps I was shrinking, becoming smaller with each word. Power of attorney, tomorrow. While I stood here in the good dress I'd pressed this morning, the one with the pearl buttons Robert had loved, holding a bottle of wine I'd driven 20 minutes to buy. Because Jessica only drank that specific vintage from that specific vineyard, what if she doesn't sign? Brandon's voice carried doubt, a small mercy, or perhaps just fear of getting caught. Then we moved to Plan B, the assisted living facility. We've already toured 3. The one in Glendale has an opening. Her house sells, we clear the equity, and everyone's happy. Everyone. The word echoed in the space behind my sternum where my heart was doing something irregular and painful. I'd written another check last week. $15,000 for Brandon's emergency. Something about the mortgage and unexpected home repairs. Before that, it was Jessica's car. Before that, Amy's private school tuition, though Amy was my granddaughter and I'd have paid that gladly. Before that, medical bills, business startup costs. A vacation they deserved after working so hard. The checks piled up in my memory like autumn leaves, brown and dead, and covering the ground. She won't even remember dinner by the time the medication kicks in fully. Jessica again, confident. Perhaps this was how she'd learned to sound so certain about furniture arrangements and holiday schedules. Practice. Tomorrow morning we'll tell her she agreed to everything last night. She'll doubt herself. They always do. They always do. I pushed away from the doorframe. My legs felt distant, mechanical, but they moved. I walked past the door without looking in, continued down the hall to the powder room, locked the door, stared at my reflection in the mirror above the pedestal sink. The woman looking back was old. When had that happened? Grey hair cut sensibly short, those deep lines from nose to mouth, the soft flesh under her jaw that no cream would fix. But the eyes were sharp. Robert's eyes, he used to say, hazel with gold flecks that caught the light. He'd loved those eyes right up until the cancer took him 8 years ago. 8 years. 8 years of Sunday dinners with Brandon and Jessica. 8 years of Christmas mornings and birthday lunches and endless small kindnesses. 8 years of being slowly, methodically emptied out. My hands gripped the edge of the sink. The porcelain was cold. Everything in this house was cold now, even in May. They wanted me confused, drowsy, manageable. I looked at my hands, the wedding ring I still wore, the age spots like watercolour stains, the blue veins mapping paths beneath thin skin. 74-year-old hands. A 74-year-old obstacle standing between them and the money in my accounts, the equity in my house, the comfortable life they'd grown accustomed to funding. I thought about Robert, what he would do. He'd been a lawyer, precise and measured. He'd taught me to read contracts, to understand what I was signing, to never let anyone make me feel stupid for asking questions. Money makes people cruel, he'd said once. Never forget that. I'd forgotten. Or I'd wanted to believe my own son was different. The dinner bell, the actual antique brass bell from Robert's grandmother, rang from the dining room. Jessica's voice calling, "Eleanor, dinner's ready, Eleanor." She'd never called me Mom, not once in 15 years of marriage to my son. I dried my hands carefully, smoothed my dress. The pearls at my throat felt heavy. I'd worn them the day Robert proposed, the day Brandon was born, the day we buried Robert. They'd been my mother's before that, and her mother's before her. 4 generations of women who'd learned to carry themselves with dignity even when the world dismissed them as decorative objects or useful appliances. The dining room waited. So did they, my son, his wife, their plans, that wine glass. I opened the powder room door and walked toward my future. But I already knew I wouldn't drink from the glass they'd poured for me. I'd been a nurse for 43 years. I knew exactly what crushed medication looked like when it didn't dissolve completely. I knew how to check a drink, how to switch glasses, how to watch someone else drink poison while keeping my face perfectly, professionally blank. They'd taught me that, the years on the cardiac ward. How to smile while someone's heart failed. How to hold hands with the dying. How to stay calm when everything was falling apart. Jessica had chosen the wrong woman to drug. The dining room table was set with my good china. The pattern was delicate. Tiny blue flowers Robert and I had picked out 46 years ago for our first apartment. I'd hand-washed every piece after every meal for decades, careful never to let them chip or crack. Jessica was using them tonight because Sunday dinners meant bringing out the nice things, which was her way of acknowledging that everything nice in their lives came from my wallet. There you are. Jessica's smile was wide and bright. She wore cream-coloured linen that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I was starting to worry. "Brandon, pour your mother some wine." Brandon stood by the sideboard, the Merlot already open, breathing. He was 47 now, with grey threading through his dark hair and soft flesh around his middle. When had he stopped being the boy who brought me dandelions from the yard? When had he learned to look at me and see only numbers? Let me help with that. I moved toward him, my voice steady. Years of nursing had taught me how to lie with your face. You know I like to pour my own, never quite enough otherwise. I picked up my glass, the one he'd just filled, and walked it to the sideboard, setting it down beside Jessica's. Hers was already full, waiting. I switched them while reaching for the wine bottle. A simple movement, natural and unremarkable. Brandon was looking at Jessica, checking for approval. He didn't see. "Actually, let me pour fresh ones." "For both of us." I emptied his careful pour down the bar sink, such a waste of good wine, but necessary, and refilled my glass from the bottle. Clean, safe. Then I picked up Jessica's glass, the one that had been mine, and carried it to her place setting. How thoughtful. Jessica smiled as she sat down. She didn't notice. Why would she? In her mind, I was already confused, already diminished, already someone who wouldn't notice her own drugging. I settled into my usual chair, the one at the head of the table that had been Robert's. They'd tried to move me to the side several months ago, saying it was better for conversation, but I'd refused. It was one of the few times I'd said no to them. They'd backed down quickly, which should have told me something about how carefully they were managing me. Amy arrived late, breathless and apologetic. 16 years old, all long limbs, and dark eyes like Brandon had been at that age. She kissed my cheek, really kissed it, not the air beside it like her mother did, and collapsed into the chair beside me. "Sorry, Grandma, track practice ran over." "You're allowed to be late for your own life, sweetheart." I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, hard, like she meant it. Jessica cleared her throat. "Amy, we've talked about this. Sunday dinner is at 6 sharp. No exceptions. It's fine." I kept my voice mild. "She's here now." The meal began. Roasted chicken that Jessica had likely picked up from that expensive market she'd stopped cooking years ago, but still accepted compliments as if she'd spent hours in my kitchen. Roasted vegetables, a salad with that dressing that cost $12 for a tiny bottle. I watched Jessica drink her wine. One sip, testing. Another. The glass was half empty before the main course arrived. "This is delicious," Brandon said. Cutting his chicken with unnecessary focus, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Thank you," Jessica beamed. "I thought about trying that new recipe, but you know how Eleanor loves the classics." Eleanor. Never Mom. Never anything warm. "How are you feeling, Mother?" Brandon finally looked at me. "You seem tired." "I'm 74. I took a bite of chicken. It tasted like ashes. Tired comes with the territory. Exactly. Jessica leaned forward, her voice soft with false concern. We've been worried about you. This big house, all alone. It's too much. I manage fine. But do you? She reached across the table, not quite touching my hand. Last week you forgot about lunch with Barbara. I hadn't forgotten. Barbara had cancelled. But Jessica didn't know that because she didn't actually talk to my friends. She just collected stories about my supposed decline like evidence for a trial. Everyone forgets sometimes. Amy's voice was sharp. I forgot my entire math homework last week. That's different. Jessica's smile went brittle. You're 16. So age means you can't have a bad day, Amy? Brandon's warning tone. This isn't your conversation. She's my grandmother. The words hung in the air, possessive, protective. I felt something warm behind my ribs, something I hadn't felt in months. Someone was defending me. Someone saw me as a person worth defending. Jessica's face flushed. She lifted her wine glass, drained it, poured another. The medication would be building in her system now. I knew the timeline. 15 to 20 minutes before noticeable effects. 30 before she'd need to sit down. 45 before they'd panic. How's school? I asked Amy, deliberately shifting the conversation. You said you had that chemistry exam. We talked. I let Amy's voice wash over me, bright and real and uncomplicated. She told me about her teacher who explained molecular bonds using pop songs, about her friend Marcus who was trying to grow bacteria in his locker. As an experiment, about the track meet next weekend, where she might actually place in the 400 metre. I half listened to Brandon and Jessica's occasional interjections, their careful attempts to steer the conversation back to my supposed failing health, my dangerous independence, the smart decision to downsize. 20 minutes in, Jessica's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. She frowned, set it down carefully. 25 minutes. She blinked slowly, like her eyelids were suddenly heavy. Are you all right? I asked, my voice perfectly measured with concern. You look pale. I'm fine. But her words were starting to blur at the edges. Just tired. 32 minutes. She tried to stand, reaching for the table. Her legs didn't quite work. She sat back down hard, confusion spreading across her face. Jessica? Brandon was on his feet. What's wrong? I feel... She looked at me, and for just a moment, something clicked behind her eyes. Understanding. Horror. She knew. I met her gaze steadily, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched her realize what I'd done while my face stayed composed and grandmotherly and completely, utterly calm. Then her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward onto my good china, scattering the tiny blue flowers across the tablecloth. The ambulance took 23 minutes to arrive. I know because I watched the clock on the mantel, Robert's grandfather's clock, still keeping perfect time while Brandon called 911 and Amy held Jessica's hand and whispered that everything would be okay. I sat in my chair at the head of the table and drank my clean wine slowly, tasting every sip. The paramedics were efficient and professional. Mid-30s, the woman with capable hands and a calm voice. She reminded me of myself at that age, before the years wore the sharp edges smooth. They checked Jessica's vitals, asked about medications, allergies, what she'd eaten. Just dinner, Brandon said. Chicken, vegetables, wine. He looked at me helplessly. She only had 2 glasses. 2 glasses, I confirmed. My voice was steady, concerned, exactly the voice of a worried mother-in-law. We all had the same meal. They loaded Jessica onto the stretcher. She was conscious now, groggy and confused, trying to form words that wouldn't quite come. Her eyes found mine as they wheeled her past. I didn't look away. I wanted her to know I was still here, still clear-minded, still capable of making decisions, still dangerous. I'll follow in the car. Brandon grabbed his keys, his phone. Mother, can you stay with Amy? Of course. I reached for Amy's hand. She was crying silently, fat tears rolling down her young face. We'll wait here. The door closed behind them. The ambulance siren faded into the distance. The house settled into silence, the kind that has weight and texture that presses against your ears. Amy wiped her eyes with her napkin. One of the linen ones I'd embroidered years ago with tiny flowers. What happened? I don't know. The lie came easily. Nurses learn to lie. Sometimes it's kinder than the truth. These things happen sometimes. She seemed fine. Amy's voice was small. And then she just wasn't. I stood, began clearing the table. The routine was soothing. Stack the plates, scrape the uneaten food, load the dishwasher. My hands knew the movements without thought. Amy helped, silent and shaken. We worked together in the kitchen, and I was grateful for her presence, for her youth and warmth, filling the spaces where my anger lived. Grandma? She was drying the wine glasses, careful with the delicate stems. Are you really forgetting things? The question caught me mid-rinse. I shut off the water, turned to look at her. She was so young, so earnest, with Brandon's dark eyes and something of Robert in the shape of her face. No, I said. I'm not. But they keep saying, I know what they keep saying. We looked at each other across my kitchen, across the decades between us, across the understanding that was clicking into place behind her intelligent eyes. They want you to move, she said slowly, into that place, the one with the sad activities room and the smell. They toured facilities? Last month. Mom made me come, said we were looking for a friend's grandmother. Amy set down the glass carefully. But the lady kept calling you Mrs. Whitmore and talking about your room preferences. The dish soap bubbles on my hands were rainbow-coloured in the overhead light, pretty and ephemeral. Like trust, I thought. Like family. They want to sell your house, I know. They want your money, I know that too. Amy's face crumpled. This isn't fair. This is your house, your money. You worked for it. 43 years as a nurse. I dried my hands on the blue kitchen towel. Your grandfather was a lawyer. We saved, we planned. This house is paid off. My retirement is secure. Everything I have, I earned. Then why? Because I let them. The words came out harder than I intended. I let them take and take and take because I wanted to be generous, because I wanted to be needed, because when your grandfather died, I thought maybe if I gave enough, I could buy my way back into feeling like I mattered. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the kitchen window. You matter, Amy whispered, to you. I cupped her face in my old hands. But your parents see me differently now. What are you going to do? The question hung in the air between us. What was I going to do? I was 74 years old. My son and his wife had tried to drug me, to make me sign away my autonomy, to warehouse me in some facility while they liquidated my life. What was I going to do? I'm going to protect myself, I said. And I'm going to protect you. Me? You're 16. In 2 years, you'll be 18. You'll need college money, living expenses, a start in life. I released her face, stepped back. I'm going to make sure you have those things, but I'm going to make sure they come directly to you, not filtered through your parents. Amy nodded slowly. She was a smart girl. She understood. Will you hate me, I asked, when this gets ugly? It's already ugly, Grandma. They just hid it better. My phone rang. Brandon. I let it ring 4 times before answering, making him wait, making him wonder. Mother? His voice was strained. They're admitting her. They think maybe a stroke or a reaction to something. They're running tests. He paused. Can you bring Amy to the hospital? It's getting late, school tomorrow. But I'll bring her by after school tomorrow if Jessica's still admitted. My voice was firm, final. Amy needs sleep. Mother Brandon. I let the words sit there, heavy and deliberate. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up before he could argue. Amy was staring at me with something like awe. You just hung up on him? Yes. You never do that. I never did that. I corrected her gently. Past tense. That night, after I drove Amy home to the house I'd helped them buy, after I returned to my empty house and locked the doors, I sat in Robert's chair with a cup of tea and looked at the ceiling and thought about power. Real power isn't loud, it isn't angry, it's quiet and precise and it knows exactly where to cut. Tomorrow I would call the bank. Monday morning I dressed carefully, navy slacks, white blouse, the pearl necklace. Robert had always said I looked like someone who meant business in navy and pearls. The bank opened at 9. I arrived at 9:03, early enough to show I was serious, late enough to avoid appearing desperate. The lobby was cool and quiet, all marble floors and potted ferns. A young man in a suit greeted me, couldn't have been more than 25, and asked how he could help. I need to speak with a manager about my accounts. He looked uncertain, probably calculating whether this old woman was worth his time. What type of accounts? All of them. I kept my voice, pleasant, firm. Checking, savings, investment portfolio. I'll wait. 10 minutes later, I was in Margaret Chen's office. She was 50-something, with grey-streaked hair and intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses. We'd met before, years ago, when Robert and I had set up the trust. She'd been a junior associate then. Now she managed the entire branch. Mrs. Whitmore. She shook my hand with real warmth. It's been a while. How can I help you today? I set my purse in my lap, folded my hands on top of it. I need to remove all authorized users from my accounts immediately. Her expression shifted, became carefully neutral. All authorized users? Brandon Whitmore, Jessica Whitmore, anyone else who might have access. May I ask why? You may not. I met her eyes steadily. But you can verify that I am Eleanor Whitmore, that I am of sound mind, and that these are my accounts. I have the right to remove anyone I choose. She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. You do. Let me pull up your accounts. The computer screen glowed between us. She clicked through pages, her face professionally blank. I see that Brandon Whitmore has been an authorized user since 2007, Jessica Whitmore since 2012. They have full access to your checking and savings accounts. Total balance across those accounts is... I know what the balance is. I'd checked it this morning, $243,000, the accumulation of decades of careful saving and compound interest. I want them removed today, now. I can do that. She typed something. I should mention that there's a pending automatic payment scheduled for tomorrow, $2,200 to a mortgage company. Their mortgage, the one I'd been paying for the last 18 months, ever since Brandon had come to me with that story about temporary cash flow problems. Cancel it, Mrs. Whitmore, cancel it, please. More typing. She was being careful, documenting everything. Good. I wanted documentation. I'm also going to need to review all the other automatic payments set up from these accounts. She printed the list. It was longer than I'd realized. Their mortgage, Jessica's car payment, Amy's school tuition, that one I'd keep, the country club membership. I hadn't known they'd charged to my account. A lawn service, a house cleaning service, a grocery delivery subscription, $6,200 a month flowing out of my accounts into their lives. Cancel all of these except the one to Riverside Academy. I pointed at Amy's tuition. That stays. Everything else goes. That's a significant change. Margaret's voice was gentle, professional. Are you certain? I'm 74 years old, not senile. The words came out sharper than I intended. I softened my tone. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't a rash decision. Of course not. She kept typing. I'll need you to sign some forms. The paperwork took 20 minutes. My signature over and over, looping and familiar. Eleanor Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore. Each signature a small act of reclamation. When we finished, Margaret handed me new debit cards. The old ones will be deactivated by end of business today. These are your new cards, new numbers. No one will have access but you. I slipped them into my wallet. The leather was worn, soft with age. Robert had given me this wallet on our 20th anniversary. Everything I owned seemed to carry his fingerprints. One more thing. I met Margaret's eyes. I'd like to set up a trust. A protected trust for my granddaughter, Amy Whitmore. She turns 18 in 2 years. I want funds available for her college education and living expenses, distributed directly to her, with no access granted to her parents. I can arrange that. We'll need to involve our estate planning department. She made a note. They can usually see people within a week. Today, please, or tomorrow at the latest. Mrs. Whitmore, Margaret. I used her first name deliberately. My son tried to drug me yesterday evening. His wife collapsed at my dinner table after drinking the wine that was meant for me. Right now they're at the hospital running tests. And tomorrow they're going to realise that their mortgage payment bounced. I don't have the luxury of waiting a week. The silence that followed was profound. Margaret's face went through several expressions: shock, concern, calculation, before settling on grim understanding. I'll make some calls, she said quietly. Wait here. She left. I sat in the leather chair and looked out the window at the parking lot. An old woman in a sensible sedan. That's what anyone would see if they looked. They wouldn't see the fury that burned in my chest like a pilot light that had been waiting decades for someone to turn up the gas. Margaret returned, with a man in his 60s, silver-haired and expensive suited. Gerald Morrison, head of estate planning. He'd known Robert. They'd served on some charity board together. Eleanor. He clasped my hand with both of his, warm and solid. Margaret mentioned you need immediate assistance. I do. We spent the next hour designing the trust. Amy would receive full access at 18, with funds released for college expenses before then upon proof of enrollment. Brandon and Jessica would have no access, no oversight, no knowledge of the amount. The money would flow directly from the trust to the school, to Amy's bank account, to her landlord when she got her first apartment. "This is ironclad," Gerald said as I signed the final papers. "No one can challenge this without significant legal resources and proof of incapacity or coercion. And I'll testify if needed that you were completely lucid and determined today. Thank you." Robert was a good man. He gathered the papers into a folder. "He'd be proud of you." I wasn't sure about that. Robert had loved Brandon, but Robert had also valued dignity above almost everything else. He'd taught me that in the years after I became invisible to everyone but him. My phone buzzed as I walked to my car. Brandon. 3 missed calls, 5 text messages. "Mum, where are you?" "The mortgage payment didn't go through. The bank says my access was revoked. What's going on? Call me now." I didn't call. I drove home through the Monday morning traffic, past the coffee shops filling with young people on laptops, past the grocery store where I'd shopped for 40 years, past the park where I'd pushed Brandon on the swings when he was small enough to fit in my lap. The house was waiting, cool and quiet. Mine. I made tea, Earl Grey, the good kind, from the loose leaves Robert had preferred, sat in his chair, waited for the phone to ring. It didn't take long. Brandon arrived at 2:30. I watched him pull into the driveway from the living room window, the same window where I used to watch for him coming home from school, where I'd watched him leave for college, where I'd watched him bring Jessica home for the first time. He looked exhausted, crumpled. His shirt was the same one he'd worn yesterday, wrinkled now, untucked. He'd been at the hospital all night. I opened the door before he could knock. "What the hell is going on?" His voice was loud, aggressive. Not the tone he usually used with me. The mask was slipping. "The mortgage payment bounced. The bank said you removed me from your accounts. They won't even tell me why. Come in." I stepped back. "We should talk sitting down." "I don't want to sit down, I want answers." "Then you'll stand while I sit." I moved to Robert's chair, lowered myself carefully. My knees were aching today. The weather probably, or stress, or age, all 3. "Close the door, Brandon. The neighbours don't need to hear this." He slammed it. The sound echoed through the house. I didn't flinch. "Is Jessica all right?" I asked. Polite, concerned, the way a good mother-in-law should sound. "They can't figure out what happened. Her toxicology screen is clean, all her vitals are normal, but she was unconscious for 3 hours. They're keeping her another night for observation." He ran his hands through his hair. "But that's not why I'm here. What did you do?" I protected myself. The words sat between us, simple, clear. Protected yourself from what? From being drugged. His face went white, then red, then white again. "What are you talking about?" "Sunday evening, before dinner, I came down the hall and heard Jessica telling you how she planned to crush medication into my wine, how she'd make me drowsy and confused, how you'd use that confusion to get me to sign power of attorney. I kept my voice level, factual. You asked how much. She told you. You didn't say no. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're confused. You misheard. I'm a nurse, Brandon. I was a nurse for 43 years. I know what medication does to people. I know how to recognize it, and I know how to switch 2 wine glasses when no one's looking. The truth landed like a physical blow. He actually staggered back a step. Jessica drank what was meant for me. I smoothed my slacks with my palms, a nervous gesture I'd never quite broken. That's why she collapsed. That's what they'll find if they test her for the specific medication she planned to use on me. You're insane. No. The word was soft but absolute. I'm clear-headed for the first time in years. You switched the glasses. He said it like he didn't believe it, like he couldn't reconcile this action with the mother he thought he knew. You poisoned Jessica. I protected myself from being poisoned. There's a difference. She could have died, but she didn't. I met his eyes. She received a dose meant to make an elderly woman drowsy and confused. It made a younger, healthier woman sleepy. The hospital confirmed she's fine, no permanent damage. He was shaking, with rage or fear. I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Why? The word came out broken. The money, the mortgage, the accounts. Why would you do that? You tried to drug me, Brandon. We were trying to help you. Help me sign away my autonomy. Help me into an assisted living facility. Help you sell my house. I felt something crack in my chest. Not my heart breaking, something else. Something that had been holding me together in a shape I'd outgrown. I heard everything. Jessica was very detailed about your plans. We're drowning. The words exploded out. Of him. Do you have any idea what it costs to live anymore? The mortgage, Amy's school, Jessica's car, the repairs, the insurance, everything. We can't keep up. Then live within your means. That's easy for you to say. You have everything. This house, your savings, your pension. You're sitting on a fortune while. We're barely surviving. I earned that fortune. My voice stayed quiet. It was a choice, that quietness. Screaming would have been easier. 43 years of 12-hour shifts, weekend work, holiday work. I earned every dollar, and you're not entitled to it simply because you're my son. I'm your only child, yes. The word carried weight. And I loved you enough to sacrifice everything to give you opportunities I never had. College, law school, a start in life. I thought I was teaching you to be independent. Instead, I taught you to expect someone else to solve your problems. He was crying now. When had that started? Tears running down his face, his mouth twisted. So what, you're cutting me off completely? I'm setting boundaries. The phrase felt foreign in my mouth. Modern, therapeutic, but accurate. You can't access my accounts. You can't make decisions about my life. You can't drug me and warehouse me when I become inconvenient. We wouldn't have. You did. I cut him off. You planned it. You would have done it. The only reason you didn't is because I stopped you. The silence stretched out. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door walking her dog. Normal life continuing. What about Amy? Brandon's voice was small. Her school is paid for. Directly. I set up a trust. She'll have college money, living expenses, everything she needs. But it goes to her, not through you. You're punishing us by I'm protecting her. I leaned forward slightly, because if I don't, you'll take her money too. You'll rationalize it. Call it family, call it need, call it whatever makes you feel better, but you'll take it. I would never. You tried to drug your mother. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick, choking, true. Brandon backed toward the door. His hand found the knob. Jessica was right. You've changed. You're not the mother I knew. No. I agreed. I'm not. The mother you knew said yes to everything. She thought love meant sacrifice. She thought being needed meant being valued. I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 74 years in my bones. That mother is gone. He left without another word. I watched his car pull away, too fast, tires squealing slightly on the turn. The house settled back into silence. But it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was mine. I made more tea, took my pills, the real ones, the ones my doctor prescribed, sat in Robert's chair with a blanket over my lap and waited for the shaking to stop. It took a while. The attorney's office was in a building downtown that still had that old money elegance, wood panelling, leather chairs, a receptionist who looked like she'd been there since the Kennedy administration. Thomas Wright had been Robert's colleague, though younger by 15 years. He'd sent a card when Robert died and called every year on. The anniversary. He was the kind of man who remembered things like that, Eleanor. He stood when I entered his office, came around his desk to shake my hand properly. It's good to see you, though I gather not under the best circumstances. No. I settled into the chair he indicated. I need to change my will. He didn't ask why, just pulled out a legal pad, clicked his pen. All right, walk me through what you want. I'd thought about this carefully, all night actually, after Brandon left, after the shaking stopped and the anger settled into something colder and more permanent. Everything goes into trust for my granddaughter, Amy. She gets full access at 25, partial access starting at 18 for education and living expenses. Until then, the trust is managed by a neutral party. You, if you're willing, or someone you recommend. Thomas made notes. His handwriting was precise, controlled, lawyer's handwriting. And your son? Nothing. The pen stopped moving. He looked up. Eleanor, I know what you're going to say. That family is complicated, that I should think carefully, that wills written in anger often get challenged. I kept my hands folded in my lap. This isn't anger, this is clarity. May I ask what happened? I told him. All of it. The overheard conversation, the switched glasses, the hospital, the bank. My voice stayed level throughout. Factual. Like I was giving a patient report during shift change. When I finished, Thomas set down his pen and was quiet for a long moment. Outside his window, I could see the courthouse where Robert had tried so many cases. The steps where we'd had lunch on pretty days, back when we were young and thought we'd live forever. I need to ask you something difficult, Thomas said finally. If they'd succeeded, if you had drunk that wine, would you have signed the power of attorney? I don't know. The honesty surprised me. Maybe. I was so tired of disappointing them, so tired of being the obstacle to their happiness. You're not an obstacle. I know that now. He nodded slowly. I'm going to draft this will exactly as you specified, but I'm also going to document our conversation. Your mental state, your reasoning, the circumstances. If Brandon challenges this, and he will, I want a record that shows you were completely lucid and acting with full understanding of your choices. Thank you. There's one other thing you should consider. He leaned back in his chair. A medical power of attorney. Right now, if something happens to you, Brandon would likely be appointed to make medical decisions. Given what you've told me, is that something you want? The question hit me like cold water. I'd been so focused on protecting my finances, my home. I hadn't thought about what would happen if I couldn't speak for myself, if I was unconscious or confused or incapacitated in some other way. Who else could I name? Anyone you trust. A friend. Amy, once she's 18. Even your doctor. The important thing is that it's someone who will honor your wishes, not their own interests. Amy. The answer came immediately, when she turns 18. Until then, I thought about my friends, the ones who still called, the ones who hadn't drifted away into their own aging. My friend Barbara Chen. We've known each other 40 years. She's a retired teacher. She'd respect my choices. I'll draw up the paperwork. We spent another hour on details. What specific assets went where, how the trust would be structured, what happened if Amy predeceased me. An awful thing to consider, but necessary. What happened if I developed dementia or became incompetent? What about your house? Thomas asked. That's a significant asset. It goes into trust. Amy can sell it or keep it, her choice. But I want to live in it for as long as I'm able. We can specify that. Life estate, essentially. The house is in trust, but you have absolute right to live in it until death. What if they try to force me out? They can't. His voice was firm. Not without a court order. and to get a court order they'd need to prove you're mentally incompetent, which, given our conversation today and the documentation we're creating, would be very difficult. Something inside me loosened, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. How long until everything's finalized? A week for the will. The medical power of attorney can be ready by tomorrow if you can get Barbara to. Come in and sign. I'll call her today. As I stood to leave, Thomas walked me to the door. Eleanor, I have to tell you, what you're doing takes courage. A lot of people in your situation would rationalize their child's behavior, make excuses, keep hoping for change. I did that for years. I pulled on my coat. The hoping wore me out. Robert would be proud. People keep saying that. I buttoned the coat carefully. I'm not sure it's true. He loved Brandon so much, believed in him. He loved you more. Thomas said it quietly, certainly. I remember how he talked about you, his partner, his equal. If he were here, he'd stand with you. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The drive home took me past Amy's school. I could see students on the track, running laps. One of them might be her, though from this distance I couldn't tell. Young people looked so similar from far away, all energy and potential and future. I'd protected her future. Whatever else happened, I'd done that much right. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Jessica, not Brandon this time. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Eleanor. Her voice was cold, controlled. The warmth she usually performed was gone entirely. We need to talk. About what? About how you're destroying this family over a misunderstanding? I closed my eyes, took a breath. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I heard every word. You heard a conversation out of context. We were concerned about you, trying to help. By drugging me? The doctor suggested mild sedation might help with your anxiety. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I wondered how long she'd been rehearsing it. Since yesterday? Since the hospital? Since she woke up and realized what had happened?
Jessica, I'm 74, not stupid.
I never said you were stupid. You planned to make me stupid. Confused, manageable. I opened my car door, stepped out into my driveway. My driveway. My house. My life. And now you're calling to manipulate me into believing it was all for my own good. You've cut us off completely. Do you understand what you've done? Brandon could lose the house. We could lose everything. Then I suggest you find a way to pay your own mortgage. You selfish. I hung up. The second time in 2 days, I'd hung up on one of them. It was getting easier. Inside, the house was cool and quiet. I'd left the heat low, saving money maybe, or just preferring the cold. It felt cleaner somehow. I called Barbara. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I need you to sign some papers, legal things. A pause. Then, carefully. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's complicated," I said, "but I think it's going to be all right eventually. I'll be there, whatever you need." After we hung up, I sat in the living room and watched the light change through the windows, golden afternoon fading toward evening. The trees in the backyard were budding, spring coming, whether anyone was ready or not. The phone rang again. Brandon, then Jessica, then Brandon again. I didn't answer. Amy came to see me on Thursday afternoon. I'd expected her eventually, but not this soon, not with that expression on her face, tight and worried and older than 16 should look. "They're fighting about you." She dropped her backpack by the door, didn't take off her jacket, screaming, "Mum broke a plate yesterday. Dad's sleeping in the guest room." "I'm sorry. Don't be." She met my eyes. "They're fighting because they can't use you anymore. That's not your fault." Such clarity in one so young, or maybe not so young, maybe 16 in a house built on manipulation, grew you up faster than it should. "Sit down." I gestured to the couch. "Have you eaten?" "I'm not hungry." "Sit anyway." She did, collapsing more than sitting, all teenage awkwardness and exhaustion. I went to the kitchen, made tea, real tea, the kind that takes time, not the microwave kind, and brought it back with those butter cookies she liked. "Mum says you've lost your mind." Amy wrapped her hands around the mug. "Dad says you're being vindictive. They're talking about getting a lawyer, about having you declared incompetent." I'd expected this. Thomas had warned me. Still, hearing it from Amy's mouth made it real. "Can they do that?" Her voice was small. "They can try." I sipped my own tea. "They'll fail." "How do you know?" "Because I've been to the bank. I've been to an attorney. I've documented everything. I'm 74 years old, but I'm not confused or incompetent. Any evaluation would show that." "What if they lie?" "Then my lawyer will produce recordings of our conversations, documentation of my financial decisions, my medical records showing no cognitive decline." I set down my mug. "I've been very careful, sweetheart." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "I hate this. I know. They're my parents. You're my grandmother. I shouldn't have to choose." "You don't have to choose." I reached over, covered her trembling hands with my steady ones. "You can love them and still see them clearly. You can wish they were different and accept that they're not. Those things can exist at the same time." "How?" The word came out broken. "How do you do that?" "Practice." I squeezed her hands gently. "Lots and lots of practice." We sat in silence. For a while, the clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn, the sound distant and suburban and normal. "Are you lonely?" Amy asked suddenly. "Now that you've cut them off?" The question deserved honesty. "Sometimes." "The house is very quiet. Do you regret it?" "No." The answer was immediate, certain. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my son became someone who would drug his mother. But I don't regret protecting myself." Amy pulled her hands back, wrapped them around her mug again. Mum says you'll die alone, that when you're old and sick, no one will care because you pushed everyone away. The cruelty of it hit me. Not Jessica's cruelty toward me, but her cruelty in saying such things to her own daughter, using a child's fear of losing her grandmother as a weapon. Amy, look at me. I waited until she did. Dying alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person's. Living as someone else's possession is worse. Being useful but not valued is worse. Having people in your house who see you as an obstacle instead of a person is worse. But you're not an obstacle. I was to them. The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. As long as I had money and gave them access to it, I was useful. The moment I became more expensive than profitable, the moment I might need care, might need attention, might slow down their lives, I became a problem to be solved.
That's horrible.
Yes, I agreed. It is. She was crying now, silent tears running down her young face. I moved to sit beside her, pulled her against my shoulder the way I had when she was small and had nightmares. She smelled like teenage things, body spray and shampoo and school hallways. But underneath, she still smelt like my granddaughter. I don't want you to die alone, she whispered into my shoulder. Then visit me. I stroked her hair. Not because your parents tell you to, not out of obligation, but because you want to, because we matter to each other beyond what I can give you. I will, I promise. The trust I set up for you, I don't care about the money, I know. You don't. That's why you're getting it. I eased her back, looked at her tear-streaked face. Your parents care about money. They see it as love, as security, as proof of worth. But you're different. You see people as people. Don't let them make you into someone who counts relationships in dollars. She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. I need you to understand something else. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Your parents might try to use you to get to me. They might ask you to talk to me, to convince me to change the will, to restore their access to my accounts. They might make you feel guilty for coming here, for loving me, for accepting money that's meant for you. I won't listen to me. I cupped her face in my old hands. If they do that, it's not your fault. You're 16. You're not responsible for fixing your parents' marriage or their finances or their relationship with me. That's not your job. What is my job? To be 16, to run track, to study chemistry, to figure out who you want to become. I smiled, though my eyes were burning. Everything else is adult business, but I feel like I should do something. You're doing it. You're here. You're drinking tea with your grandmother. You're being present without trying to fix things. I released her face. That's everything, Amy. That's exactly enough. She stayed for another hour. We didn't talk about her parents or money or any of it. We talked about her track meet, about the boy in her English class who wrote terrible poetry, about her chemistry teacher's obsession with molecular models, normal things, young things. Things that had nothing to do with the mess the adults in her life had created. When she left, she hugged me hard at the door. "I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart." I watched her walk to her car. Not the expensive one Jessica drove, but the used Honda I'd bought for Amy's 16th birthday, practical and safe, and hers. She waved before driving away. The house settled back into its silence, but it wasn't lonely silence, not this time. This was the silence of someone who'd said what needed saying, someone who'd protected what needed protecting. That night, I cooked a real meal for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, just chicken and vegetables, the kind of simple food Robert had loved. I set the table with my good plates, the ones with the blue flowers, lit a candle, not because it was an occasion, but because I could. I ate slowly, tasting everything. When had I stopped tasting my food? When had eating become just another task to complete, rather than a small pleasure to savor? After dinner, I didn't rush to clean up. I poured a glass of wine, my own choice, my own bottle, safe and uncomplicated, and sat in Robert's chair, watching the evening light fade. The phone rang. Brandon, then Jessica, then Brandon again. I didn't answer. I just sat there with my wine and my silence and my newly reclaimed life, watching the world outside my window and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. The price was too high for happiness, but peace. The quiet, earned peace of someone who'd finally stopped abandoning herself. 6 weeks later, the wildflowers I'd planted along the back fence bloomed, purple and yellow and white, the kind of natural mess that Jessica would have hated. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon on my knees in the dirt, pulling weeds, letting the sun warm my back. Barbara came by with iced tea and sat on the porch steps watching me work. "You look happy," she said. I sat back on my heels, considered the word. Was I happy? The mortgage had gone to foreclosure. Brandon and Jessica had sold their house, moved into something smaller. Amy called me carefully when her parents weren't listening. I hadn't seen my son in 5 weeks, but I'd also slept through the night. No more anxiety dreams about being locked in rooms or forgetting important appointments. No more checking my bank balance 3 times a day. No more performing gratitude for guests who saw my home as their storage unit. "I'm peaceful," I told Barbara. "That might be better than happy." She nodded, understanding without needing explanation. That's what 40 years of friendship looked like. Amy graduated from track season with a 4th place finish in the 400 metre. I went to her final meet, sat in the bleachers with the other families, cheered until my voice went hoarse. Brandon was there too, on the opposite side. We didn't speak, but he saw me. Saw Amy run to me after her race, sweaty and triumphant. Saw her hug me like I mattered. The attorney called with news about the will challenge. They'd filed. Thomas had filed our documentation. The judge threw out their petition without even requiring a hearing. Insufficient evidence of incapacity, the ruling said. Petitioners motivated by financial interest rather than genuine concern. Legal language for your son tried to steal from you and failed. I hung up and felt nothing. Not triumph, not vindication, just that same peace I'd been cultivating, natural, unforced, allowed to grow wild. The silence in my house changed. At first it had been empty, then it was mine. Now it was full of choices I'd made, boundaries I'd set, a future I was shaping on purpose. I planted tomatoes, called old friends, started, volunteering at the hospital just a few hours a week, enough to remember who I'd been when I was someone who helped people instead of someone people helped themselves to. Amy turned 17. I took her to dinner, just us, at the nice restaurant downtown. We talked about colleges, about what she wanted to study. "Are you going to forgive them?" she asked over dessert. "Mum and Dad?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "I already have," I said finally. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting them back in. It means I'm not angry anymore. I understand them now, how fear makes people cruel, how money makes people desperate." I set down my fork. I forgive them for being human, but I don't trust them. There's a difference. Can you love someone you don't trust? Yes. The answer was immediate. You can love them from a distance, you can wish them well, but you don't have to give them access to hurt you again. She absorbed this, nodded slowly. That night, after I dropped Amy home, I stood in my kitchen and looked around. The blue china in the cabinet. The candles I burned just because I liked them. The wine rack with bottles I'd chosen. The refrigerator with exactly the food I wanted. I thought about Robert. Would he understand? Would he approve of how I'd cut off our son? I thought he would. Robert had valued dignity above almost everything else, and I was finally living with dignity. The house was mine, the life was mine, the silence was mine, and in that silence I could finally hear myself again. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself, the one who always says yes, the one who's afraid of being difficult, the one who thinks love means erasing yourself, I want you to know something. Your silence isn't kindness. It's abandoning yourself. Your no isn't selfishness. It's remembering you're a person, not a function. Your boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival. You don't owe access to people who see you as an obstacle. You don't owe resources to people who won't thank you. You don't owe your entire life to children who would drug you to take it. You're allowed to be more than useful. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to protect yourself, even from the people you love, especially from the people you love. I'm 74 years old. I spent most of my life being good, being generous, being whatever people needed me to be. Now I'm just being Eleanor, and Eleanor is enough.